I responded to 755 15th Street in the city and county of Boulder, Colorado at approximately 5:55 hours on the 26th of December 1996 on a report of a possible kidnapping. Upon arrival, I met with a distraught Patsy Ramsey and her husband John. John advised me that their 6-year-old daughter, JonBenet, was missing and that their 9-year-old son, Burke, was asleep upstairs. John directed me through the house and pointed out a 3-page handwritten note which was laid on the wooden floor just west of the kitchen area. He told me that his wife had found the note on the bottom step of a spiral staircase which led to the upper levels of the house. The note advised the Ramseys that their daughter was in the possession of a group of suspects and demanded a ransom of $118,000 to be delivered by a means detailed to them later in a subsequent telephone call. So it appeared sometime in the night that one or more suspects entered the Ramsey home, went up to the second floor, and kidnapped JonBenet from her bed and took her to some unknown location, and they were prepared to call the Ramseys and demand a ransom of $118,000 for her safe return. I had arrived at the Ramsey home at approximately 600 hours on December 26, and that I had examined the exterior of the Ramsey home as well as the yard. I noted that the air temperature was approximately 10 degrees Fahrenheit. There was a light dusting of snow and frost on the exposed grass in the yard outside the Ramsey home. Some of the grass and yard was covered with snow from a previous snowfall, and this snow was described as being crusty and measuring 1 to 2 inches deep. I saw no fresh footprints in any of the snow or in the frost on the grass. Sergeant Paul Reichenbach paged Robert Whitson, and he called crime scene investigators, victim crime advocates, and his boss, Eller. Next on the scene at the Ramsey residence was Officer Carl Veach. John Ramsey told me that he had locked all the doors and the windows were secure the night before. I drove my car up the alley and parked in the back of their house and went around to the patio door, which was a glass door leading into the kitchen and back of the house, and didn't see anybody, but saw a piece of paper lying on the floor. Looked at it. It was facing the other direction. Read it, and after the first few lines realized something very strange was happening. And so I ran around to the front of the house and knocked on the door and was let in. After Patsy called 911 and reported her daughter was kidnapped, Patsy called 2 sets of her friends and yelled at them to come over, but didn't give any reason why she needed them to come over to their house right away. Mr. Fernie told the police that he was the first of the Ramsey's friends to arrive. His wife Barbara came later in her car. As Fernie drove over, he thought that John Ramsey must have had a heart attack, since Patsy hadn't told his wife what had happened. The ransom note advised speaking to anyone about your situation, such as the police, FBI, etc., will result in your daughter being beheaded. It's interesting to note that the ransom note was laid out nice and neat on the spiral stairs, and it was laid out on the floor in a very similar way. Priscilla and Fleet White arrived at the Ramsey's house while it was still dark out, sometime between 6:15 a.m. and 6:20 a.m. They might have been the first to arrive at the Ramsey house. They arrived just around the same time that John Fernie arrived, but John Fernie parked in the back where they parked in the front. The ransom note stated that the kidnappers would call between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow. At about 6:30 in the morning, John Ramsey attempted to call his personal pilot to tell him that they wouldn't be able to meet them at the airport, and if he could get a message to his older children to call home. At around 6:45, the crime scene investigators showed up to collect the fingerprints and take photographs of the crime scene. Also at this time, the crime victim advocates showed up and at some point brought coffee and bagels for the Ramseys and their friends. Barbara Fernie showed up at the Ramsey residence, and she was church friends with the Ramseys from St. John's Episcopal Church. And she had called their Reverend, Roland Hoverstock, to please come over to the Ramsey's house because of what was going on.
I will call you between 8 and 10 a.m. tomorrow.
John Ramsey. I remember Burke asleep in his bedroom. I don't want him to get up in the midst of this madness and wonder what is going on. I asked Fleet White if Burke can go to his house and be with Fleet Jr. He agrees. I woke Burke up and as gently as possible told him that JonBenet was missing and that he was going to his friend Fleet White's house for a while. Burke looked depressed and began to cry, so I knew he understood the gravity of our predicament. I got him dressed, and momentarily he and Fleet left the house. Burke was carrying his new Nintendo 64 game under his arm. Burke Ramsay was awakened by his father shortly after Reverend Hoverstock arrived, and he was taken to the Fleet residence as soon as he was dressed. I did not speak to him other than to walk him to Mr. Fleet's vehicle. He seemed confused and was crying, and Mr. Ramsay again told me that he had slept through the night. JonBenet is missing, yet nobody talks to Burke about what happened that night. John Ramsay doesn't question Burke about what might have happened, and the police don't speak to Burke about what happened that night. This was an emergency situation, and the police legally could have asked Burke all kinds of questions. At 8:10 a.m., Detectives Linda Arndt and Fred Patterson arrive at the Ramsey residence. They talk to John about how to answer the ransom call, yet after waiting 2 hours from 8 to 10, no ransom call came in. By 12 o'clock, all the police personnel left the Ramsey's house, except for Detective Linda Arndt. And she told John and Fleet at 1 o'clock to go look around the house and see if anything was missing or disturbed by the kidnappers. And John and Fleet went down to the basement and looked at the broken basement window, and then they went to the boiler room, and John Ramsey found JonBenet's dead body on the floor, covered or wrapped with a white blanket and a nylon cord around her throat and tied around her wrists and duct tape on her mouth. And he picked her up and he carried her upstairs to the living room, where Detective Arndt told him to put her down. Just to give you an idea of the Ramseys' neighbors. So first, the Ramseys' house is in the dark red. And then south of them is Diane and her son Adam. And then on the other side of the street is Melody and Luther Stanton. 2 doors to the north is Joe and Betty Barnhill's house. And then across the street on the Ramsey side was neighbor Scott Gibbons. Melanie Stanton at 378 15th Street told the police she had heard a child scream at about 2 a.m. on the night of the murder. Her bedroom window, which looks towards the Ramsey house from across the street, had been partly opened. Sound tests conducted by the police indicated that the scream heard by Melanie Stanton across the street should have been heard by the parents in their bedroom. Diane Brumfitt, brum, 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 another neighbor, said that on Christmas night she did not see a light on at the southeast corner of the Ramsey's house, though there had been a safety light in that spot for years. I was watching TV and didn't notice anything strange through the window that faced the Ramsey's house. At about midnight, I looked out my kitchen window towards the Ramsey's house and saw a light on in the kitchen area of their house. This is important information because it shows that somebody turned on the light in the kitchen that night. Scott Gibbons, the Ramsey's next door neighbor, told police that at about 8 a.m. he saw the door on the side of the Ramsey's house open. But by then, anyone inside the house could have opened the door. Well, this ends this episode of Unsolved, and I'll see you tomorrow night with a case about the Zodiac Killer.